Welcome, Year 11s. We're going to be looking at the introduction towards our first folio task on earning and spending money. This task is broken down into a few different components. I've uploaded this document into our Google Classroom, so if you haven't yet started to participate in Google Classroom, you need to just take a good look at that point, and I will be able to respond to you by giving you the detailed information of your specific assignment. The task is designed in such a way that every student has a unique set of data in which they can then devise the ability to create this business, how to pay money, how to accumulate their wages, how to do the mathematical calculations, have a discussion about how that took place, and then come to a conclusion in terms of whether they should or shouldn't accept the job and whether it was worth their while. The total report shouldn't comprise of more than 6 A4 pages. This folio task makes up 20% of your overall grade. Your first two sets made up 60% in total, and there's one more folio task to follow this one. If you look on the second page, which is also on the same document, you'll see here that there's a unique set of data. It says, ask your teacher to complete the table below with all the information you need to complete the calculations for week 1. So this information, this data I'm giving to you is unique to you. We're going to look in this session at wages and piecework and what's the difference between them, types of employment, and so on. In part 1, that whole section covers your types of payment. Part 2 looks at a spreadsheet giving you information for a worker that is based on those standard hours, overtime, and the rates taken, and all of those to be calculated using a spreadsheet which I've provided for you. There's an extension activity which you might be able to participate in partially or completely. So we'll be looking at that in the upcoming weeks. So what I wanted to start with today wasn't actually the assignment. It was actually just looking at employment. Now, employment is not something that's unique to adults or to non-school leavers. Right now, as a student in year 11, you probably are in some sort of employment, and you are considered an employee, a word that you would be very familiar with. People love talking about their employees. As an employee, you receive an income from your employer. So the boss, you. And so I'll just put that one down here. He's the boss. This is you. That boss, if he is following the minimum wage requirement laid down in Australia, will be able to pay you definitely a minimum wage and maybe a little bit more. But in general, that employer pays the employee some form of earning. Now, that earning is going to take a different shape for different types of employees, and the earning is determined by what we call a workplace agreement. You might just call it a contract, but it's important that even a young person in full-time employment, part-time employment, knows exactly what's in their workplace agreement, the conditions for working, the hours for working, and the wages to be paid. So thinking about employment and the workplace agreement, you might at this stage, because you're a student and because you're still studying at school, you might be looking at different types of employment that are part-time, that's not permanent. But in general, we can say that employment forms into a few categories. So I'm just going to give a heading here called employment types. If you think about my job, for example, I'm somebody that has a permanent job. I have to go to work every day and I work at the same company permanently. So that is an ongoing basis based on my workplace agreement with my employer. So that's being a permanent worker. Sometimes people elect to be a casual employee. That casual employee means they are an ongoing employment, um, and they are in the same firm, but there's no assurance that they would have this job on a permanent basis. Somebody else might say, I have a contractual agreement, so I have part time hours, or I might do things in a different way, but according to my contract, my arrangement makes it possible for my employment to be guaranteed at specific times in a particular way for the jobs that I do. So, permanent, I am employed, ongoing employment is assured. Casual, ongoing employment is not assured, even if it's happening. Contract is happening when employment is guaranteed for a specific period of time, and that person knows that they'll be able to uh, get paid for that. So, within these different classifications, employment can be specified as, so inside all three of them, it is possible that they could be of two other types. This could be full time or it could be part time. So, full time employment has a number attached to it, 37.5 hours per week. That's considered full time. Your part time meaning has a slightly different variable attached to it. So you've got a regular set number of hours per week, which is less than full time. So it is set hours, it is also per week, and it is less than full time. Okay, so we've got that distinction. And permanent employment, casual employment, and contract employment could be in one of those two categories. Okay, that brings us to the last part of what I want to talk to you about today, and that is earnings. So, thinking about earnings, I'm going to make a little star there and just the star here. So, this is earnings. When you think about earnings, most of you might say, well, I'm thinking about what I'm taking home in my paycheck. So, earnings can be given different names, and different people will be earning different amounts based on their workplace agreement, based on even age or experience. We're going to be looking in our assignment at two of the specific ones that relate to our task. And the two that we're going to be looking at is going to be earning a wage and piecework. But I thought it might be good for you just to think about the other ones that are there. So when you say somebody is earning a salary, that salary is a fixed amount regardless of the time worked. So built into the person's salary are leave days, sick days, travel days, and all sorts of things, but it's a fixed amount. Then you've got a different form of earning called a wage. That wage is an hourly rate. So that's determined by the more hours you work, the more money you earn. Then you've got a third one called piecework. Now, piecework is something that someone gets paid according to the number of items they produce rather than the time that they spend in that employment. So that's a bit of a tough one. So if they are in a factory, for example, that's producing a certain product, they need to sew a certain number of bags or produce a certain number of dresses or crank out a certain number of machines on their particular assembly line. That person has a piecework earning. Then one which you might have come across when you go into a store, when people are super eager to serve you, is commission. This is what happens when someone gets paid more for all the sales that they make. So they're able to earn more money depending on the sales that they make. And then the last one, for people who work to provide a service, for example, a doctor, a dentist, a plumber, an electrician, so they provide a service, we say their earnings is a fee. So you might ask for the fee for a doctor, a fee of a plumber, and what do they charge you to come to your house, charge you to do the dentist work on your teeth. So that is an overview of earnings and how you earn. So what we want to look at for this section is we want to specifically look at wages, and we want to look at piecework as a focus of how do we calculate it. And most of you actually already know the answer to this question, so I might just introduce it. If you remember the last time you checked your pay stub, when you think of that, a wage can simply be itemized as the number of hours, obviously, that you're at work doing the employment, so the number of hours worked by you multiplied by the agreed upon wage per hour. So that is the formula that we use for calculating a wage. And in wages, there are variables like overtime, double time, half time, and you'll be able to work through some of those calculations. What is the formula that we think about when we think of piecework? Now, piecework is a variation of an hourly wage in which an employee gets paid not for the time, but for what they produce, rather than the hours that they work. So this method is often found in the clothing industry with how many jackets do you produce, how many pairs of shoes or ties that you put out in the assembly line. So when you think of piecework, that's what we're looking at. We're still looking at a rate, which is the wage agreed upon per hour, but instead of the hours worked, you replace that with the number of items. So you'd still have your same rate of pay. So if your rate, for example, is 95 cents, then that 95 cents gets multiplied by the number of items that was produced by that employee. So if an employee produces 100 items per day, this is what you would end up with. So if we take piecework, we can say the number of, not hours this time, we're going to say the number of items that they produced multiplied by the rate per hour. So it's just a variation of wages. So if the person, for example, produced 100 items and the rate of pay was simply going to be 80 cents, then that person has earned $80 for having produced the 100 items. But if we, for example, have in a different company the number of hours worked, so let's say this person has worked for 8 hours, a specific workday, so 8 hours worked, the wage per hour that was agreed upon was let's say $20 an hour. So if we're looking at a rate of just $20 an hour, but you've worked for an 8-hour day, you're going to have earned $160 for that work day. So they differ a little bit in terms of wages and piecework. I'm going to give another upload to you of exactly how do we calculate a wage and how do we calculate piecework in the next recording.